Hey everybody, how are you today, my lovely, beautiful viewers? It's Friday. It's Black Friday specifically. How many of you have gone out and gone shopping today? And if you went out and went shopping, why? We are in the middle of a pandemic. I don't know if you know that or not. Anyway, my name is Stephanie. Welcome to my channel. If you are new here, this video, I don't even know. Is it a show? I don't know. It's just me talking about whatever is on my mind. I do my makeup as I'm talking, but it's not a makeup tutorial. So if you're looking for a makeup tutorial, this is not the place. But I hope you'll stay and enjoy anyway. I don't remember if I introduced myself or not. My name is Stephanie, and welcome. So what's on my mind today, now that I've got my thoughts about Black Friday out of the way? For whatever reason, well, it's not like it's a mystery. I know why. Zombies have been on my mind. Why, you might ask? Well, it started out like this. So, through the pandemic, I have taken to watching many a movie, series, YouTube videos about various and sundry dystopian nightmares. And also, at the same time, we just learned a few days ago about zombie minks. Did you hear about this? I think it was it in Denmark? The mink population, which is they use it for the creation of mink coats and whatnot. They were found to be infected with COVID and were transmitting that to humans. So the government decided, you know what, maybe it's a good idea to just kill the minks and bury them. Well, that sounds great. Well, it doesn't sound great in theory. It sounds cruel and needless. Why were all those minks being farmed anyway? But that's a whole different topic. Don't wear real fur is what I'm getting at. But anyway, so they killed these minks and buried them in a grave, a mass grave, that was about, I don't know, I think it was 3 feet deep. And, oh, by the way, this was in Finland, actually, I think. And as the animals began to decompose, they started coming up through the soil. And so the headlines that we've had about this have been in reference to, quote, zombie minks, which is very funny to me. But I've also been watching, I was going to talk about this anyway, and that just happened to coincide with my idea, like, hey, I should talk about zombies. I've been watching The Walking Dead, and I realize I'm like 10 years late to the party, but I started watching it, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so good, and I want to be like, get on social media and be like, hey, have you guys seen this awesome new show, The Walking Dead? But anyway, so I'm like, I started thinking about what is our collective fascination with zombies. So I just thought it would be a fun topic to explore, and oh boy is it. So zombies. Now when we think of zombies, we typically think of, you know, the typical George Romero zombie. Slow and lumbering and not speaking, just driven entirely by their need to feed, and what they like to feed on is human flesh, and in some iterations, specifically the brain. You know, brains. We've all heard that trope, correct? So I started digging in and really wanting to understand where this idea about zombies came from and why we're so fascinated by it. So here we go. Are you ready? I realize that this is not really the season for talking about all this stuff, but let's be honest. When is it not the season for zombies? That's my question. So zombies actually have a history that dates back to ancient times. There is some evidence that can be dug up in ancient Greece. You know, there's some evidence that ancient Greece, after digging up various archaeological sites, we know that some of their dead were buried with rocks and other heavy objects, essentially pinning the deceased to the ground. So there was clearly some fear that the dead were going to rise again, that the zombie apocalypse the zombie apocalypse is nigh. We must pin down our dead. So there's some evidence for that. However, the first stories about zombies actually dates back to 17th and 18th century Haiti. Now, I remember hearing about Haiti and having some relationship to zombies a long time ago, but I never really dove into it to see what it was all about. And I did this time, and it's very interesting. So, in Haiti, in the 17th and 18th centuries, there were people being kidnapped from Africa, brought to Haiti, and enslaved to work on sugarcane plantations. The plantations were especially cruel, and it was not at all unusual for people who were kidnapped and enslaved to pass away within just a few years, meaning in the minds of the plantation owners that it necessitated going out and finding more people to kidnap and enslave. And the conditions, as I mentioned, were very brutal. Slavery itself was an incredibly brutal thing. So the idea of zombies came about then because death was seen as an escape from all of the cruelty of slavery. However, slavery was also so pervasive and so cruel. There was the idea that for some people, there would be no escape from slavery even in death. That even in death, people would still be enslaved, only they wouldn't be enslaved this time to a plantation owner. They would be enslaved by their own flesh. There is some evidence to suggest that this was thought to be especially true for enslaved people who died by suicide. And the thought was that unlike people who died of either the effects of slavery or of natural causes, it was believed they would have a freedom. They would be able to return to their motherland, and their spirits would live in freedom. However, for the person who died by suicide, it was believed that their spirit, or I'm sorry, their body remained trapped on the plantation, and they would rise up as an undead entity who was still enslaved, and now they had a soulless body. They were just walking around in this reanimated corpse and still enslaved. And there is some lore that says that these zombies would be used as free labor, free undead labor that required no upkeep, no care whatsoever on these sugarcane plantations. As we know, people who are enslaved were already providing free labor, but bonus, with a zombie, you don't even have to feed it or give it a place to sleep or anything. So, like, what's not to love from the perspective of the slaver? Now, in 1804, the enslaved people of Haiti staged a rebellion that would secure their freedom, and they were successful. And I believe this is credited as being the first successful uprising of enslaved people to achieve success. So after French colonialism in Haiti fell, the idea of zombies actually became relegated more or less to Haitian folklore. And there were a specific practitioner of voodoo known as, I cannot speak. What is going on with me? So there were specific practitioners of voodoo known, I believe I'm pronouncing this correctly, as the Bokor. Bokor? I'm not sure. B-O-K-O-R. And what they would do was use voodoo and various ingredients to create what were called zombie powders. Now, one of these ingredients was a neurotoxin found in pufferfish, and it can be fatal. However, if it's administered in just the right dose, it will not be fatal, but it will cause issues like confusion, loss of like muscle control, slurred speech. I shouldn't say loss of muscle control, but like a difficulty performing voluntary and intentional movements. I should say that. You know, still walking around, but unable to speak, unable to think clearly. Vocalizations would just be moaning, you know, like you would expect to find in a zombie. Now, administered in higher doses, this zombie powder could create a coma and could create symptoms that, to the observer, could make the person look dead, thus causing them to be buried alive and then revived later. That is the origin of zombie lore. Now, in 1932, so this remained, you know, this zombie lore remained a favorite of people for a long time. And I remember, I didn't read up on this, but I do remember hearing about, in the United States, there was a concern that the dead would rise again from their grave. And this concern came from the unfortunate incidents in which people were poisoned by, like, lead, for example. And they used to make, like glasses that people would drink out of. Those had lead in them. And so it was possible for somebody to experience lead poisoning unknowingly. Like, it wasn't an intentional thing. It wasn't because of carelessness. It was because the utensils they were using in their day-to-day lives had lead in them. So sometimes people would appear to be dead, but really they were just in a very, very deep coma because of the lead. And sometimes these people would be buried, and then they would revive while they were, you know, after they'd been buried, they're still in their coffin, they revive, they're like, where am I? And would start clawing at their coffins and everything to get out. And it was, you know, kind of a nightmare, I would imagine. So there is some notion that, apart from the origins of the zombie lore, people of the time had their own concerns about people coming back from the dead. So this was a pervasive idea in our culture, is what I'm getting at. So in 1932, there was the movie. It is considered to be the first feature-length movie about zombies ever, called White Zombie. It's a very interesting film. I watched it a couple nights ago under the guise of research, but I love old horror movies. I just do. And this takes place in Haiti, and the villain in the movie is actually a white practitioner of voodoo who uses, you can see him in the film creating like zombie powders and stuff, and he uses these powers to gain control over people, and then he manipulates them mentally to do what he wants them to do. In the movie, the white zombie is a young woman who, you know, is like a love, you know, a love lost type of thing, and this man wants her to fall in love with him. The white voodoo practitioner says, sure, I'll help you, and ends up creating a zombie out of this woman. Now, she's at no point in the movie does she die. She's simply under the mental control of this practitioner who weakened her with the zombie powders, making her easy to manipulate. And it's like a whole thing, you know, the guy who's trying to get her to fall in love with him ends up becoming a victim himself. And there's some, you know, subtle subtext there that it's white people using powers that they don't understand. Because in the beginning of the film, the white people do encounter people who are, you know, black people who are using chanting and so forth during this funeral. And there is some discussion that there is concern the man that they are, or the person they are burying, will rise from the dead and walk among them as a reanimated corpse, a zombie. So you can see in the film where there is a notion already that white people appropriating this zombie lore does not end well. Oh, if they only knew. So in 1968, we are introduced to what would become basically the Americanized zombie. Night of the Living Dead hits theaters, and it is considered absolutely terrifying. It presents zombies in a way that we had not seen before. For example, in White Zombie, yes, there is some heavy makeup. You can tell these people aren't, like, they're not under their own control. Someone else is controlling what they do. They have that spaced out look. They're just looking kind of lost. And these, in the movie White Zombie, these zombies are actually being used as free labor on a sugarcane plantation. In Night of the Living Dead, we, for the first time, see the flesh-eating zombie. I watched that one a couple nights ago, too. And even today, that movie is terrifying in its own right, because you see how powerless people are in the face of these monsters who are just driven entirely by their appetite. They are driven entirely by their need to consume human flesh. So in the movie, though, the main character, Ben, is a black man, and he is trapped in a house with white people who will not listen to him. Now, many people have said that it is a great illustration of the state of, you know, racial tensions at the time. George Romero said he did not intend to do that. It was just that the man who auditioned for the part of Ben had the best, you know, he did the best audition and he got the part. It had nothing to do with his race. But it provides a powerful subtext for the movie, because in the movie you have a black man who is trapped in a house full of white people who will not listen to him about what they need to do to stay safe. They're ignoring his lived experiences with these monsters who are just outside their walls. They think they know better than a man who has actually dealt with them face to face, whereas the others have only heard about them. Or the one person who also had an encounter with them, she is being hysterical and putting everyone in danger with her screaming and her carrying on. And they are all at the same time criticizing this man for the methods he is using to try to keep everyone safe, and also heavily relying on him to keep everyone safe. And even in 2020, that's still a powerful message, because to this day, many black people will tell you that their own lived experiences are routinely ignored by white people who think that they can speak for the black community better than actual black people can. Now, Jordan Peele's movie Get Out was inspired by Night of the Living Dead. And I'm just going to read to you what he says himself about the role George Romero's zombies and the movie Night of the Living Dead itself played in the development of the film Get Out. He says, well, now I have to wait for the article to load. For some reason it refreshed. He said, where did it go? All right, talking about Night of the Living Dead's Ben and his own film's black protagonist, Get Out's Chris, Peele said, theoretically, their racial perspective is the very skill that helps them. You could write an interesting essay about how the lead in Night of the Living Dead is a man living in fear every day. So this is a challenge he is more equipped to take on than the white women living in the house. Chris, in his racial paranoia, is onto something that he wouldn't be if he was a white guy and there was a similar thing going on. Now, I have to tell you, in 2020, we've had so much happening. We've had an election cycle that has just been wild, and that's putting it mildly. We have had a pandemic. We have had people in positions of power lying to us right to our faces and telling us that, no, ignore what you know, this is actually true. And I have to tell you, all along the way, listening to people of color has, you know, especially black men and women, has been a source of truth, because they have been able to spot things miles away that white people haven't picked up on until the crucial moment, and then written articles about it as if they were the first one to notice it. It's been very illuminating for me, to say the least, to see how these black voices have been silenced and their positions or their platforms usurped by white people who ignored them up until it became blatantly obvious that what they were trying to warn everybody about was actually true. It has been amazing in the worst ways to see how quickly the voices of people of color, specifically black people, have been dismissed this year and every year and always. But then when it becomes obvious that what they were trying to tell us is true, then white people want to take the credit. They have been able to, the black people that I have been able to, or been privileged to, I should say, excuse me, listen to, have said months before everyone else, hey, this is what's going on. And I can only guess that the reason they are able to spot these things before white people are is because they live in a reality where threats are present all the time. So they're able to assess situations more readily than somebody who's not under constant threat would be able to do. I'm going to have to pause pretty soon here and go get something to drink because I'm talking so much and making my mouth run dry. So that's an interesting perspective on zombie lore as we know it today. And I think zombie lore as we know it today is kind of a blank slate on which we project a lot of our societal ills. As I told you in the beginning, part of the inspiration for this was watching the series The Walking Dead. Despite being 10 years late to the party, I'm watching this series in fascination. I'm all caught up now, just waiting for new stuff to drop next year. But through it all, it's been very interesting to watch how the social dynamics shift and switch, and sometimes switch back throughout the series. And the series makes it really evident that in the zombie apocalypse that we all watch movies about and make series about and so forth, it is a chance to sort of reinvent the society that we want to live in. People become very powerful in the zombie apocalypse. You know, every little decision has powerful outcomes. Even if it's a decision that now, in a relatively comfortable reality, might seem insignificant, in a world where the living are being hunted and consumed by the undead, every decision has a consequence. And it's interesting to me because this dynamic takes a lore that at one time was meant to represent the plight of those who are enslaved, whether it was during their enslavement, when the idea of a zombie represented how pervasive and how oppressive slavery was, so much so that it could even haunt you after you die, to being something that represented the specter of slavery that still hangs over so much of the world that just has not been dealt with. It's this thing that does not go away until you face it head on and deal with this legacy, to now it represents something along the lines of survival of the fittest. And I couldn't help but notice as I'm watching The Walking Dead that so much of people's survival depended on having means, having opportunity, and having a strong network of support that would allow you to survive. And it makes an interesting commentary for how true that is in our world today. People who, as we've seen through the pandemic, people who don't have the means and don't have a strong network of support and are not able to avoid contact with the virus are people who are not surviving. They're the ones who are taking the heaviest hit from COVID-19, and it's, for some, it's cost, they're paying the ultimate price. I mean, this virus is killing them. And if they had the means and the support to be able to stay out of the fray as much as possible, their odds of survival go way up. People who are not working out on the front lines, be it grocery store workers, gas station clerks, healthcare workers, whatever the case might be, they have a much better chance of surviving than people who are, by necessity, out there every day facing the public and risking contracting the virus. So that's very interesting to me. Now, there are other series. One series that I enjoyed on Netflix is called Santa Clarita Diet. I don't know if you watch this or not, but if you haven't and you enjoy zombies, I think you should. It stars Drew Barrymore and Timothy Oliphant. Oliphant? I don't know. But they're in the show. And Drew Barrymore's character becomes a zombie. And, you know, as zombies are wont to do, she starts killing people and consuming their flesh. What's interesting to me about this is her whiteness and her status as a suburban white woman, for the most part, protects her from a lot of scrutiny. There is a presumption of innocence afforded to her because of her status as a white woman, as a woman who's living in the suburbs. And in the show, anybody who gets too close to the truth is simply done away with. They just kind of get killed and eaten. That's just how it works. And it's interesting to me because whether it was intentional or not, I don't think it was, but it really makes a strong statement about the presumption of innocence suburban white women enjoy, that, you know, people would assume they never intend to cause harm, you know? And then you have these people, the Amy Coopers of the world, who are calling the police on black men and women, but typically it's black men, just trying to live their lives and just trying to do what they do every single day. And you have a white woman who calls the police because she supposedly feels threatened just by this person existing. And you'll see people online who will defend it, who will be like, well, maybe she did feel threatened. We weren't there. We don't know what happened. But in the age of cell phones, where virtually every minute of our lives can be recorded, yes, we do know what happened. And we know that this person called the police just because they felt threatened by the very existence of a black person in their sphere. So I think it's interesting that the Santa Clarita Diet afforded the main character so many opportunities to be found out, and yet with every single one of them, her whiteness protected her and her wealth protected her. And it goes back to the notion that if you are white and a person of means, you are pretty much going to be safe in a difficult situation. Now, that's not to say that no wealthy white people are suffering in 2020. That is not to say that no wealthy white people would become victims in a zombie apocalypse. But what that does say is, when it comes down to it, having means and having opportunity and having a strong network of support, and let's be honest, being white does offer a lot of protection from a lot of things. And I think that we're seeing that especially now in a time when we're seeing the effects it had, this awful time is having on communities that don't have those things. Is having on marginalized people in general, whether it is marginalized by your race, where you live, a disability, etc. We are seeing a clear distinction between the quote haves and have-nots. And it's been a very interesting thing. So what do you think it is that drives the fascination with zombies? Do you think that this idea of being able to reinvent society the way you want it to be, and to be a hero when perhaps prior to that disaster you were not, you were just an everyday person just living your life, do you think that there is an element of that to the fascination with zombies? I kind of think there is. I kind of think the idea of being able to reinvent the world that we want to live in and to be the hero in that world is a strong driving force behind the absolute love affair people have with zombies. Now, I think it is unfortunate that so much of the original zombie lore has fallen by the wayside. So much of the original purpose for it has become entirely lost with the new interpretation of zombies and the significance of them, which is basically survival of the fittest. I think that there's a lot of symbolism lost there, and I think it really whitewashes over some things that we need to talk about, and we aren't discussing them. And because we're not discussing them, much like zombies, they're not going away. They have to be dealt with. They have to be. And much like zombies, not dealing with them could end up being our downfall. So many of the societal ills that we face in the United States come from things that were put in place centuries ago by people who treated other people like they were not significant, like they were there to be bought and sold and used and tossed aside. And we still have remnants of that in the United States today that we just simply aren't dealing with. So much like a zombie, it is not going away. I'm going to have to pause pretty quickly here and get something to drink because my throat is very dry. So I'm going to do that, and then when I come back, I will finish my thoughts on this topic that I find absolutely fascinating. So I will be back in just a few minutes, and I will look like a totally new person. You might say I'm going to reinvent myself. All right, hang on, I'll be right back. And I am back. I look like my name should be Bethany, and I don't know why. How do you like it though? So you know what else refuses to die is my love for this hair color and my enjoyment of cheap wigs, because it lets me reinvent myself just for a little while. So anyway, back to the subject of zombies. So another thing I've noticed is the typical George Romero zombie is slow and lumbering, and a friend told me, and I couldn't find it anywhere to verify this, so if you have an article or something that can show me this, I would love it. But they said that George Romero made them this way because if they were slow and lumbering and they could easily be overcome. The problem could be dealt with if society would work together. Incidentally, this is why I hate bangs. They just like whoop. I don't dig it at all. But back in the 90s, I definitely rocked this hair color. Anyway, so it's interesting to me. I also think there is a growing fascination with the idea of like the reverse happening, like becoming more human. I think there's also a growing fascination with the reverse happening of people becoming more human. I recently became aware of this game called Detroit Become Human, and I've been watching a playthrough of it by Jacksepticeye. And this game is very interesting because it follows these androids who they were built to provide services, and that ranges from childcare to housekeeping to services of a more intimate nature. And some of these androids become self-aware, and they begin to fracture their coding, and they start acting autonomously. And I think that's an interesting reversal of the zombification process, because when someone is zombified, in the modern understanding that we have of it, they're bit, they take a few days, they appear to be normal, like everything is as it should be, and then they start to become sicker and sicker, and eventually they die, and then they turn and they become a zombie. And in Detroit Become Human, the androids become self-aware, they start to defy their programming, and they start to act autonomously, and they become more human. So I think that there is a, as we are living in a more technological age, people are becoming more concerned that our dependence on these devices that we use is too much, and it is taking away some of our humanity. So I think, whereas before this, there was a somewhat of fascination with the idea of losing our humanity through sickness and death and so forth, and then and I think that can also be a commentary on the way American society can drain people of their humanness through, you know, working people. Basically, their entire lives are spent working to pay off bills, and really in the service of someone else who makes a lot more money than they do, but they have to do it. They're stuck in the grind, and people are just drained of all the essence of themselves in service to this larger capitalistic society. And now there's, I think, a concern that we have lost a sense of ourselves to our dependence on machines and technology, and there is a desire to get some of that back. So that's just what I saw when I watched it, and it really is very good. If you are interested in gaming and, you know, the way, especially games that tell a story, that might be a good playthrough to watch, even if you don't want to play the game yourself. But anyway, what are your thoughts on zombies? Do you think I'm totally off the mark? Do you think that there's something to anything that I've said? And also, do you think that I should be Bethany more often? I don't know why the name Bethany seems to work here, but it does. I look like, so back in the day, I worked in like an optometrist's office. I was a receptionist. I was very bad at it because I had so little patience for people. But I definitely wore this hair color at one time or another, and I probably knew somebody named Bethany back then who had the same color hair. So should I be Bethany more often? Would you like to hire me to be your receptionist? I don't want the job. I'm only kidding. When I worked I used to sell insurance. I've done so many weird things in my life, but we used to have to call places, like cold calling. Terrible, terrible thing to do. But we would call, the receptionist was always the window witch, because the receptionist would not allow the calls to go through to the person who we actually needed to talk to. And I don't want to be that person again. So, Bethany will exist only in your mind. Anyway, I want to know your thoughts. Do you have anything interesting you'd like to contribute to this conversation about zombies? Do you think it's totally inappropriate to be talking about zombies in December? And if so, why? I really want to know. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, please share it, please comment, please like it. All of those things are helpful. And if you enjoy the videos that I bring to you, you can also join me on Patreon and pledge whatever amount of money you'd like every month to help ensure that I can continue doing this and bringing whatever it is I bring to your life on a continued basis. I hope you're having a great day. Please stay home if you can. If you don't have to be out, it is entirely not worth it to go out and risk contracting COVID yourself or giving it to someone else. If you do have to go out, please wear a mask and keep your distance from people. We're all just trying to get through this. I know it's hard. I know it absolutely sucks and people are tired of doing it. But it's not going to get any better at all if we don't all do our part. And part of that is staying home when you can, and when you go out, wear a mask and practice excellent social distancing. I have to say, I have been social distancing since like 1985, so I think I'm okay, but time will tell. Anyway, have a great day. Be kind to yourself. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. Don't should on yourself. Don't should on anyone else. And I will talk with you again real soon, probably about something more in keeping with the spirit of the season, but you never know what's going to pop into my mind. Okay? So we'll just roll with whatever it is. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye. And Bethany says goodbye too. Bye.